Morning, Supervisor Simidian. When you're ready, let's do a mic check, please. Good morning, Supervisor. Can we do a mic check, please?
Hi, this is County Supervisor Joe Simidian. Are you hearing me loud and clear?
We can hear you and we can see you. Thank you, sir. Just for your information, Jess will be clerking the meeting this morning.
Thank you. And we are, I think, 3 minutes away, yes?
That is correct. We're still waiting for Supervisor Cortese.
All right. If need be, we'll start promptly at 10 as a committee of the whole. That's just
Understood.
fine.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning, Kavitha. Can we do a mic check, please?
Yes, can you hear me? Good morning.
I can hear you. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. I will mute now.
All right. Good morning. We'll ask the clerk to make sure that we are open to all comers. Let me just check in with the clerk's office, make sure we're up and running.
We are live.
Thank you so much. And we will begin with a call to order. I'm not sure if my colleague Supervisor Cortese has been able to join us yet. Let me check with the clerk and see if the clerk.
I'm not seeing him at this time.
Thank you. Well, then we'll begin as a committee of the whole with a call to order. And when Mr. Cortese is able to join us, we'll acknowledge his presence for purpose of the record. Thank you very much. First item of business is the, there he is. He's right on the dot almost here. It's still 10 o'clock. Forgive me, Supervisor Cortese. So with a call to order, Madam Clerk, do you want to call the roll?
Please, Vice Chairperson
Sure.
Cortese? Chairperson Simidian?
Here.
Thank you. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Thank you. Quorum's been established. And let me check with the clerk to see if we have anybody under item number 2, which is public comment.
I do have one request.
And who is that speaker, please?
Our first speaker is Scott Largent. I'm
All right.
unmuting you. Please accept the unmute. You will have 3 minutes to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Scott Largent. I went to a, well, actually kind of woke up to this happening downtown. On Friday, we had another protest that broke out. You know, starts off peacefully, and then it changes really fast. We have a whole group of people that are starting to show up into San Jose and Santa Clara county that are just up to no good. At this protest, they had shields, umbrellas, weapons, just stuff that it mirrored what has been going on up in Seattle and Oregon. This stuff made it down to San Pedro Square. A lot of people were out eating. I support people's First Amendment rights. I just don't support them being threatened and scared, and just seeing the expression on some of the kids' faces. I support the Black Lives Matter movement. I don't support any of this anti-fi, any of these white supremacy. I just, all these other hate groups that start showing up just to wreck shop. And I hope that we come at them here and start prosecuting them properly. They damaged our courthouses. They threatened people up and down the streets after they left San Pedro Square. I got into a couple altercations because I was filming, which was pretty shocking to have people come up and basically try to beat me up over, I wasn't doing anything wrong. So it was kind of frightening. This made it over to San Jose Mayor Liccardo's home. The neighbors were all threatened. I mean, these were death threats. They were basically, we're going to burn your home down if you don't support what we're doing. I hope, and I just keep my fingers crossed, that the Santa Clara County District Attorney, Jeff Rosen, will properly prosecute these people for what they've done. This is not protesting. This is just destroying this movement right now. What I did, and I didn't catch on to this, I'm a legal observer for the National Lawyers Guild. I couldn't find my legal observer's hat when I had gotten out of the van, and I had my American flag hat on. I'm very patriotic. My family was in the military. Friends of mine have served our country and died for our country. And the fact that I had this American flag hat on was the reason I was targeted. And it's just, I am concerned. I hope you guys can nip that in the bud here. And what I would really like to see from supervisors and elected officials is to get out there to the media, and get out there to the public and start talking about this, and start saying that you do not support this type of activity, and warn the youth of our community right now. They are going to wreck their lives if they jump on this bandwagon right now. I support their First Amendment right, not them out throwing rocks, Molotov cocktails. This is terrorism. This is terrorism. And I hope you guys warn the poor kids of Santa Clara County. They've been cooped up for 4 or 5 months. They're going to jump on the bandwagon. You know how kids get and teenagers get. So please protect our community. Thank you.
That concludes our requests to speak. My apologies, you are muted, Chairperson.
My apologies. Thank you. That takes us to item number 3, which is to approve the consent calendar, which consists today only of approval of our minutes. If I could ask Supervisor Cortese if he'd be prepared to move approval of the consent calendar as contained in our published agenda.
So moved.
And I will second, and without objection is so ordered. Madam Clerk, do you need to do a roll call by virtue of our Zoom meeting on that item?
I believe that the verbal motion and second gets us there.
All right. Well, I'll just clarify one more time. The consent calendar is approved unanimously and without objection. That takes us to item number 4, which is to receive verbal reports from the chairperson and the vice chairperson relating to items of interest to the task force. I have nothing to offer at this time that's new from our last meeting. Supervisor Cortese, anything from you, sir?
No, nothing at this time. Thank you for asking.
All right, we'll get right to it then. That takes us to item number 5, which is the CEO's verbal report. And I don't know if we're going to hear from Dr. Smith or Miguel Marquez today. Gentlemen, are you available?
I'm here.
Thank you.
We will hear later on about the lack of progress with the HEROES Act. We're watching very closely because of its impact on our budget. We sent out budget direction yesterday, and we did not figure in the proposed benefit. If that actually passes and there is a proposed or a actual benefit, that will be a positive thing. So we're watching closely.
All right. Anything else from our county council, from our CEO at this point before we move on to the county council? All right, then without objection, we'll consider the report received. Move on to county council, where I know we have a couple of items that we've asked for a particular update on, in addition to the very helpful background material contained in our packets. I believe Kavita Narayan from the County Counsel's Office is prepared to present today. Ms. Narayan, are you with us?
I am. Good morning, and I've just gone on video, so I'm not a disembodied voice. Can you hear me okay?
There you go. Thank you very much.
So I'll have a slightly longer report than usual today, given those specific requests for reports on a couple of items in addition to the litigation update grid that you just referenced. Why don't I start with the litigation update grid, since it's a faster update. The key items there are, as you know, of course, the county filed the first federal lawsuit in the nation challenging the public charge rule a couple of years ago, which threatens dire immigration consequences to certain categories of immigrants if they use public benefits. The key update for this month is that after the district court granted a preliminary injunction barring the Department of Homeland Security from enforcing that rule, the federal government appealed, and the Ninth Circuit argument is scheduled to be heard on September 15th. So it's coming up really shortly. Our office is preparing to do that argument in just a couple of weeks, and we'll be happy to report back on the outcome after that. The other update I have that's actually too new to even be included on the grid is an amicus brief we filed on Monday, August 31st in litigation over the census. We filed an amicus brief supporting a lawsuit filed by 19 local government agencies that are seeking a preliminary injunction blocking the Census Bureau's decision to cut short the 2020 census operations, including shortening the non-response follow-up period during which the Census Bureau does specific outreach to communities that are harder to count and that did not respond in the first round because they're non-English speaking or immigrant or transient, or are, it's more difficult for them to respond for any particular reason. The allegation in those cases is that the decision to shorten census operations violates the enumeration clause. It's particularly important because the pandemic has made census outreach operations more difficult. It follows up on other attempts to make politically motivated changes to the census, including the unsuccessful attempt to add a question asking about people's citizenship, which was defeated, as well as the current attempt by the federal administration to exclude undocumented immigrants from the census count, which would impact how seats are apportioned in the House of Representatives. So the amicus brief we filed on Monday argues that local governments need accurate census data, both to provide critical services like disaster response and to ensure they receive appropriate federal funding for safety net services to their community based on a true count of the population. And then of course, undercounting also affects redistricting, and it reduces a local area's political voice based on skewed population counts. So let me just pause there before I move on to the other topics.
Thank you. Go right ahead.
Okay, if there are no questions, I will move on to the specific topic of the litigation against the United States Postal Service, which was asked about. There are a handful of lawsuits that have been filed in federal court by state attorneys general. The county will be filing briefs in 3 of those cases challenging U.S. Postal Service policy changes that undermine the orderly operations of the Postal Service and impede, in particular, the administration of the upcoming presidential election. So those changes include things like removing mail sorting machines from post offices, especially in major metropolitan areas, restricting operating hours of post offices and prohibiting workers from working overtime or making extra trips to make additional deliveries to homes, delaying mail processing and sorting by prohibiting postal workers from doing any mail sorting during the morning operations before they go on their delivery runs. So in other words, they may only deliver mail that was sorted the previous day, which results in, of course, delayed deliveries. And then finally, discontinuing the longstanding practice of treating all election mail as first-class mail, which impacts both cost and delivery time. So some of the impacts of those actions include things like customers not receiving their paychecks or necessary medications for up to 3 weeks. I'm sure we've all seen also the news stories about farm animals like chicks dying while they were waiting in shipment boxes. The key impacts, though, that our amicus brief is focusing on are undermining of election administration, especially in light of the pandemic. So for the first time this year, 3 in 4 voters across the nation are eligible to vote by mail. And heavy use of mail-in ballots is certainly an issue in our county since, as you're very well aware, due to your leadership, Supervisor Smidian, use of the mail-in ballot and county-provided mail-in ballots has been a major initiative for our region for quite a long time. Without reliable mail service, government workers and residents either risk going to the polls in person and potentially exposing themselves to COVID-19 or losing their access to voting. And of course, there's also impacts on military and overseas voters too. So we'll be highlighting all of those impacts in the brief.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sure. And then the final update I have is on the presidential major disaster declaration for the wildfires to clarify whether or not the county is included in that declaration and how that impacts the types of assistance that are available. So of course, just like all things assistance related, this is very nuanced and technical. I've got a full screen of notes in front of me, but I'll try to not actually read all of them. So Santa Clara is not included in the presidential major disaster declaration. Governor Newsom requested that only for Lake, Napa, San Mateo, Santa Cruz, Solano, Sonoma, and Yolo counties, not for Santa Clara. And what that means is, one, we're not a designated county for assistance to affected individuals. So that assistance includes things like a one-time $500 payment to people who are displaced from their home for 7 days or more, so that they can get things like water, food, medications, infant formula. That is not available to county residents, as well as post-disaster assistance that helps survivors of an emergency with things like grants for temporary housing, for home repairs, low interest loans to cover property losses, and other recovery related needs. So those things are not available to county residents. We're also not designated for federal assistance for emergency protective measures like debris removal and restoration of fire damaged public facilities because there wasn't deemed to be sufficient damage of that type in our county. Now, FEMA can add additional types of assistance after the declaration is made, so that would be possible. But number one, Governor Newsom would have to request it. And number two, the governor would have to make a specific declaration to the federal government that any unmet needs in our county are beyond the ability of local government and state government to assist. So what we do have is a fire management assistance grant from FEMA that supports actual firefighting efforts. We also have federal funding available statewide for hazard mitigation. So that's a prevention related funding to help secure public facilities against future fire damage. And then the Small Business Administration is making loans available for economic injury to businesses in our county because we are deemed a contiguous county, although not within the fire impacted zone itself, if that makes sense.
Thank you very much. Anything else to your report today before I turn to before I turn to Supervisor Cortese?
Not unless there are questions, no.
Thank you. Let me go to Supervisor Cortese, who I know has been particularly focused on fire issues affecting his district in recent days. Supervisor?
Yeah, what a great segue. Thank you. Obviously, I noticed the commentary, legal commentary about FEMA assistance or federal assistance to individuals in Santa Clara County and them not being eligible. Can you go into that a little bit more, Kavita? First of all, is that just a simple matter of discretion? Well, maybe I should put it this way. If I was trying to explain that to my constituents who are residents of fire impacted areas in District 3, and the fire on the SCU, so-called SCU fire on the east side of the valley, of course, is the second largest in the state. What would the explanation be, if you could expound on it a little bit, in terms of them being left out of federal disaster assistance? I understand the short answer, they were left out, but the conclusory answer. But I think at some point soon, we're going to have to explain that. When I say we, you know, for sure my office, maybe some other members of the board of supervisors, depending on where people live versus where they own property, who they identify with as their supervisor, depending on those kind of things. And I would say on the Santa Cruz County side, of course, the same thing exists. We have employees here that live there. We have people who live here or in Los Gatos or Saratoga or Cupertino that have property there in other parts. I'll get to the punchline. At some point, I think I would like County Council to prepare for us a publicly approved explanation of that we could disseminate, you know, through the Board of Supervisors and the EOC or any other administrative channels. But could you give us a little bit more on how that really works and how we end up, or they end up, the constituents on the short end of the stick on that?
Sure, I'll do my best, and I also would welcome Dr. Smith to jump in if he has anything to add after I give my attempt. So the way that disaster assistance generally works is you have an interlocking network of first local and then going up to the state and then going up to the federal, depending on the extent of the disaster. When you have presidential declarations made, it's at the request of the state's governor. Here, Governor Newsom requested that the declaration be made on behalf of the other counties that I listed, but not Santa Clara. Now, this may bear some further clarification from the Governor's Office of Emergency Services. It is discretionary to some extent, but I understand that there may be some thresholds they consider in terms of the extent of damage that goes into the state's request made to the federal government. I don't know that there is a hard and fast threshold in terms of the number of structures or the amount of land that needs to be damaged, but that is part of their consideration. So, I mean, the bottom line is that it depends on what the governor of the state requests based on his judgment.
Oh, that's very helpful to know.
I think I'll jump in. I think at least my understanding is that we need to approach the governor to request his participation in asking for special designation for the county. And we'd look to the task force direction about involving the board in some way. Obviously, the county council and administration would like to send a letter to the governor's office and communicate with him directly, but it works a lot better if some of the elected officials are involved.
Yes, I'm more than happy to participate in that, and I'm sure others would be as well. Again, I mean, just so this isn't completely viewed as a future thing or anticipatory, I'm already getting constituent inquiries by shorthand in email, as in, when is FEMA going to show up? So I understand there may be some discretionary threshold, but when 375,000 or more acres burn, including everything from power poles to fence posts to water troughs to water tanks to multiple residences, so on and so forth, road damage. I don't know if FEMA, if there's eligibility for federal assistance for public works damage, but obviously a lot of that occurred. The Lick Observatory itself, which is owned by the state, suffered some damages. It's just hard to imagine the state wouldn't make that request. The governor himself toured that area, so clearly he, a week ago Sunday, clearly he felt that there was significant damage there that he needed to survey. So Dr. Smith can, let me for a moment defer to the chair of the task force, because we're in a formal federal task force meeting here, but I would certainly like to ask that at a minimum, my office is allowed, or I don't know if that's the right word, has an opportunity to work with you and county council as immediately as possible to get the governor's office to some point of attention on this and try to get a yes or no, whether they're actually willing to submit that request. It seems late already is what I'm implying here. So I'd like to get right on that. And I'm certainly open to suggestions. by Supervisor Semenian on any better way to handle that, or whether or not we want an update on that here or to the Board of Supervisors or anything formal like that.
Thank you,
I just
Supervisor
have-
Cortese. Dr. Smith, go ahead, Ms. Noran, excuse me.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to add one further quick point of context. One proactive thing that our county always does is in declaring a local emergency of any kind, initially by Dr. Smith and then through the Board of Supervisors, where the disaster appears to be of a magnitude or likely to grow to a magnitude that would justify federal assistance, our local emergency proclamations always include an express request that the governor seek federal assistance on our behalf. And I know our local emergency declarations are used as a model by many other cities and counties, and that request language is not just boilerplate, but it is actually something that the Cal OES office takes note of and takes action with. That's something that we always do up front. But this point about doing further proactive outreach, I think makes sense when the situation warrants it. That's all I wanted to add.
So through the chair, if I may. So what you're saying, Kavita, is the formal written request was included in the county's declaration. So that box has been checked off. It's just a matter now of.
Correct.
So it isn't as if we didn't ask. It's somewhere theoretically at the decision point at the state level or beyond the decision point. So I'm inclined to start working immediately to try to get administratively and at the governor's office some kind of response from the state on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Cortese. And Dr. Smith, I think what I would say is that I'm, as one member of the board, entirely supportive of the direction that Supervisor Cortese has articulated. It sounds to me, Ms. Narayan, and I don't mean to suggest that we should have done something differently or more, but that the request of the state is a more or less routine and perfunctory legal matter. And I think to Supervisor Cortese's point, now is the time, since as he says that box has been checked, for us to say, okay, we really meant it. Could someone please pay attention? And to the extent, certainly Supervisor Cortese can pursue that, but I think his efforts could only be multiplied if he has the support of the county executive and the county council in that effort, which I'm sure he does. And while I would be happy to sign any necessary documents or weigh in, I think probably getting the president of the board to weigh in or sign a focused letter in her capacity as our chair is our best bet. Supervisor Cortese, I want to make sure we don't give short shrift to this item because I know it's a matter of immediate importance to folks in your piece of the county and elsewhere. But anything else on this one before we go on to the next item?
Just two things, and one of them's gratitude that this came up today. Really makes me feel or see once again how important this task force has been or can be from time to time to make sure that we're getting into these issues at an action level. But the last thing I would say is, rather than a big long summary like I was asking before, not to say we don't need that at some point, but I think the immediate thing that we would need, council and Dr. Smith, is the paragraph that has the operational language or the legal terms of art that should be included in any request. Because from my point of view, that can obviously would happen by formal correspondence, but can also happen electronically by text, email, and other ways. And as we all know, when you're trying to get somebody's attention, brevity is a virtue. So I'd like to have the very short version of the language that's necessary to request that attention, to trigger that attention. Thank you. And
Thank you.
That's it. Thank you, Supervisor Smith.
All right. Thank you. Then, without objection and hearing none, we will deem item number 6, County Council's report, received and ask the clerk to reflect that in the minutes. That takes us to item number 7, which is to receive a report from Prime Policy Group relating to the fiscal year 2021 and the federal budget and appropriations process. And I think I'm going to turn to Ms. Christian from Dr. Smith's office. But before I do, I did just want to note that Tom Pike, who is our representative from Congressman Ro Khanna's office, is in the meeting with us. I want to thank him again for his participation and for the congressman's willingness to dispatch him to these meetings so that they're fully informed about our priorities. So, Mr. Pike, welcome. Nice to see your face, and hope all's well. All right, that takes us to item number 7. Ms. Christian, you want to walk us through this, please?
Yes, thank you. Good morning to everyone. It has been some time since the Federal Affairs Advocacy Task Force has received a federal budget and appropriations process update. With the federal fiscal year coming to an end on September 30th, less than a month, I've asked Prime Policy Group to provide a quick update as to the current status of each House's action on their 12 appropriation bills, and to provide a little bit of information on 2 or 3 issues or concerns that may be on the horizon. So with that, I'd like to ask Aaron Dorton to walk us through the information.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, but you're a little bit breaking up. So if you can adjust accordingly, that would be great. Thank you.
Apologies. Okay. How's that? Is that a little better?
Much better. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning. My report this morning on the federal budget and appropriations process for FY21 will be brief. For context, the House and Senate are still in the August district work period, with the Senate returning for votes next week, the week of September 8th after Labor Day, and the House also returning next week in some capacity for committee work, but they will not have votes until the following week of September 14th. With respect to the appropriations process specifically, in July, the House passed nearly all of their FY21 appropriations bills to fund the government for fiscal year 2021. I won't go into detail, but we'll make sure to follow up to make sure you all receive a chart with the FY21 numbers for the accounts that the county follows as compared with the past few fiscal years. That way you'll have a visual. But for now, I'll just note that the numbers are generally the same with a few minor unnoteworthy increases or decreases from current FY 2020 levels. The Senate, on the other hand, has yet to even mark up any of their FY21 bills due to their focus currently on the next relief package. As you're all aware, the fiscal year, as Ms. Christian just noted, the fiscal year ends on September 30th when those levels will expire. At that time, there most certainly will need to be a continuing resolution of some length to be determined, a continuing resolution of current levels. And as this is a presidential year, as we're all aware, the length of the continuing resolution and any subsequent ones post-election day and into the lame duck are up for debate, depending on election outcomes. Presumably, the first continuing resolution at the end of September will go until sometime in December. There's been December 11th tossed around as a potential date. And then if there are changes in the administration or either chamber of Congress, there will be another one most likely sometime during the first quarter of 2021, or could potentially be done during the lame duck. That completes my brief report. My colleagues and I are happy to answer any questions now or later in writing.
Thank you. Let me see if Supervisor Cortese has questions, and then I'll offer questions as well.
No, I'll pass. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Dorton, prospects for all of this getting rolled into, I know we're going to talk about COVID legislation under item number 9, and that's where I want to spend the bulk of the time today, but prospects for all of this simply getting sort of rolled up into one great big ball of wax, for lack of a less cliched expression.
Right. So I actually thought you'd probably ask that. So I think that is potentially something that could happen. Appropriators won't like that because they'll want to have something clean they can move, but it's also a way for something to be must pass and then sort of force the vote by those who may or may not want to vote for the next relief package, whatever that should be called. it may force them because they need to continue. They'll say, well, I had to vote for it. I want to continue funding the government. You know, I don't want to, maybe I don't love this next relief package. So that is definitely a possibility. My colleagues, Marty Peony or Rich Mead may have more insight into that or other thoughts. And Mr. Mead, I know, is going to do the next update on item number 9. So he may have some more color to offer then.
All right. Well, I know, you know, from where we sit and by the way our calendar works at the county level, it seems like there's, quote, a whole month left to go. But I'm thinking of session days as being appreciably more limited in number. Forgive me, that was a cumbersome phrase, that there aren't a heck of a lot of session days left between now and the end of the month. Is that also part of the challenge?
That's always part of the challenge because I have yet to look at the calendar, but usually we have the Jewish holidays are at the end of September. So that takes out a few more days there. I have not looked at when they fall this year, but generally that eats up a few days of voting time.
And understanding that this is all in the realm of speculation, are we going to have some shutdown drama?
Probably, but I would most likely turn to my colleagues on that one. Marty Peony knows the most about that that area, having been on the Senate for many, many years.
Mr. Peony, I'm going to turn to you since your colleague has thrown you under the bus on
Right
this
under the
speculative
bus, Marty.
question. Go to it.
As the tires go over me. Yeah, I don't think that, I mean, there's always a chance for a shutdown, yes. But you've also pointed out the fact that the calendar is not as flush as you think it is because the House doesn't even come back until the 14th. And they'll basically be in session 2.5 weeks before September 30th. So they'll have 2.5 weeks to put something together. But I think as Erin pointed out, I think it's very likely that a COVID bill gets paired with something to keep the government open. Because McConnell is having difficulty rounding up a large portion, at least half of his caucus seems to want to vote against any sizable COVID bill. He's getting a lot of pushback on other Republicans as they're facing possible minorityship. They become big on deficit spending and want to control it. And so the canary in the coal mine vote will be next week. Supposedly, they're going to, in the Senate, have a vote on a $500 billion COVID package. I don't expect to cut 60 because it won't be a bipartisan package put together with Schumer. But the key would be how many Republicans can McConnell round up for it. If he can get 51, then he's got that'll give him his base is how he's going to have to negotiate. And then if the package goes from there to, say, 1.2 trillion, that's added to the CR, the funding bill, then he could lose half of that. But if he picks up Democratic votes to get to 60, then keep the government going. It's part of the Rubik's Cube that McConnell has to deal with right now. And there's a chance that you could have a couple of days where there's no funding, but I don't think it'll go long if there is.
All right, thank you for that. We'll pick this thread up again, as I say, on item number 9 in just a moment. Mr. Cortese, unless there's anything else on this from you in the way of comments or questions, we can simply deem this report received and move on to item number 8, which is to look at the health policy and budget scene with Mr. Margolin's help. Good to go?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Thank you. Then we'll, without objection, consider item number 7 complete and the report received. And that takes us to item number 8, which is to receive the report from the Office of the County Executive relating to federal health policy and budget landscape. And I'll just confirm with Ms. Christian that we're going to go directly to Mr. Margolin. Yes?
Yes, that is correct.
Thanks so much. All right, Mr. Margolin,
Good morning.
what's the world look like on the healthcare front?
Well, I have a brief report for you, and I'll highlight the key health issues that we're tracking. I know that on item 9, you're going to go into the COVID relief package in greater detail, but I do want to start by flagging some of the health issues that are of concern to the county that are in this COVID relief package. The first involves the Provider Relief Fund. This is it's currently funded at $175 billion. It was part of the original CARES Act. Santa Clara County has gotten a significant amount of funding already through appropriations from this Provider Relief Fund. The House bill, the HEROES Act, adds an additional $100 billion to the Provider Relief Fund. The Senate bill, which is out there as a platform for Mitch McConnell to sort of state his priorities, actually puts in $25 billion of additional money. So there is, whether it's the House bill or the Senate bill, some additional funding that is possible, if not probable, for the Provider Relief Fund. We also have been tracking testing and contact tracing funding. The HEROES Act had $75 billion in new money, federal money for testing and contact tracing. The HEALS Act, which is the Senate Republican bill, actually has money in that as well, $16 billion. So there's a big gap, 16 billion versus 75 billion, but it's worth noting that there's money for testing and contact tracing in both bills. There are two California-specific issues that are addressed in the HEROES Act that we are tracking and that are of concern to the county. The first involves language which would guarantee the extension of California's Medicaid waiver. That's in Speaker Pelosi's package. It's important to the county for obvious reasons and multiple reasons. The state is currently negotiating with CMS an extension of our waiver, and it's possible that this language will not be needed because the state is relatively optimistic they can come to terms with CMS and get an extension of the waiver. But given the volatile political environment that we're in, and given the fact that CMS says they won't actually provide a final answer on extension until probably January, that creates a lot of anxiety on the part of the state and various providers. So we're hoping that this language guaranteeing an extension for 1 year actually survives the process. There's also language dealing with the proposed MFAR rule, the Medicaid Fiscal Accountability Rule, that we've talked about in the past, that would have the effect of blowing up the system that California and many other states have for generating a local match or state match for federal funding in Medicaid. In California and in other states, it would so restrict the definition of what's an allowable federal match or state match for Medicaid that it would potentially require the state to put up tens of billions of dollars of additional money to create the match, and that's money the state doesn't have. Texas, Florida, many other states are equally concerned, and we've made, thanks in large part to the leadership of Texas, some progress with the administration in making the case that MFAR would be a bad idea, especially during this COVID crisis and during the economic crisis we're facing. But having said that, it would still be probably useful to have MFAR language blocking MFAR in the final COVID package, and the House is working to pursue that. Let me turn now to another couple of other health issues, and then I'll complete my report. We've been tracking the issue of virtual care, reimbursement under Medicare and Medicaid for virtual care. It's a big issue for the county and for other safety net providers, and all providers, in fact, since the COVID crisis. As a result of declarations of national emergency issued by the Trump administration, we've had access to reimbursement under both Medicare and Medicaid for virtual care. It's been an incredibly important factor in the financial stability and solvency of our healthcare delivery system. Since these reimbursements are tied, though, to these declarations of national emergency, and the current declarations expire in October, there's been some concern about trying to get a permanent statutory fix in place. That actually was an effort we pursued at the state level with Governor Newsom. The governor decided not to allow that bill to move forward and not to agree to a statutory fix for two reasons. One, he's relatively confident that the national emergency will continue and there's no immediate threat of losing virtual care reimbursement. And the second reason is the governor wants to actually have a study done to evaluate how virtual care dollars are being used. So that's the virtual care update. And the last item I'll mention briefly is we've been tracking the Texas versus United States litigation, which is a direct challenge to the constitutionality of the Affordable Care Act. It's for the Supreme Court, and we've learned in the last several days that oral arguments have now been scheduled. They're set for November 10th, just after the general election. Hard to know how that will play out in the month of October vis-a-vis the general election, but we should have some initial insight into what the Supreme Court is thinking about the Texas case in early November. And that completes my report. Mr. Chairman, happy to respond to questions or comments from either you or Supervisor Cortese.
Thank you very much, Mr. Margolin. Very thorough as always. Mr. Cortese, comments or questions? And I see that you're muted.
Yeah, I don't have any. I appreciate the report. Listening attentively. Thank you.
Well then, thank you. And without objection, we will deem item number 8, report received and the item completed. And that'll take us to item number 9, which is the report from the county office of the county executive relative to the status of federal legislation in response to COVID-19. And I had specifically asked Mr. Cortese, based on an interest that both you and I had expressed previously, that issues of rent relief and mortgage forbearance be included on this item. So let me start with Ms. Christian and let her walk us through the team report here.
Thank you very much. As administration and our lobbyists have previously reported to the Federal Affairs Advocacy Task Force, Congress has passed and the President has signed 4 separate federal coronavirus aid packages that provide almost $3 trillion in funding to address the pandemic that's overcome the United States for more than 5 months. Efforts to send a 5th piece of legislation to the President have not yet been successful. In mid-July, as we shared with the task force, the House approved the Health and Economic Omnibus Emergency Solutions Act, more commonly and more easily referred to as the HEROES Act. It's a $3 trillion stimulus package. For the House Majority Party, the HEROES Act represented an opening bid in negotiations with the Trump administration and the Senate Majority Party on the next round of a federal coronavirus package. Unfortunately, Senate Majority leaders dismissed the legislation as a partisan wish list that did not have a chance of passing in the upper chamber. And the Senate Majority Leader actually called for a pause in legislative action in order to assess the impact of previous federal COVID-19 spending. At the end of July, the Senate Majority Leader announced its counter proposal to the HEROES Act. The Senate package, the Health Economic Assistance, Liability Protection and Schools Act, referred to as the HEALS Act, is a smaller $1 trillion package. To the county's interest, the most significant difference between the two proposals concerns financial aid, fiscal aid to state and local government. The HEROES Act allocates $1 trillion in additional aid to states and local governments to assist with the fiscal impacts from the public health emergency caused by COVID-19, including the addition of lost revenue as a funding category. The Senate HEALS Act provides no additional funding for state and local governments. It also includes, a provision that a direct recipient of corona relief funds, which would be a county or a city above 500,000 in population, could use up to 25% of their CRF allocation for lost revenue, but only after it certifies that it has distributed at least 25% of CRF funds it received to other local governments within the county. That's a significant problem for the county. At a high level, some other differences between the two proposals are related to unemployment insurance provisions, the Paycheck Protection Program, economic impact payments, which are generally referred to as stimulus payments, healthcare provisions that Mr. Margolin just mentioned, renter and homeowner provisions, which I'm going to ask Rich Mead from Prime Policy Group to address in just a moment, and some differences in appropriation provisions, both in what's funded as well as funding amount. And with that, I'd like to ask Prime Policy Group to talk a little bit about the renter homeowner provisions, and then share what might be expected when Congress returns next week as far as picking up negotiations and, the chances that something will actually be agreed upon and sent to the President.
Thank you, Ms. Christian. This is Rich Mead speaking, and I'll just call out a couple of provisions that I think are of great importance to the county. You'll recall that the CARES Act included 2 provisions that benefit homeowners and renters both. The homeowners could seek 180 days of forbearance on their mortgages with an extension of another 180 days, and that provision remains in effect until March 22nd of 2021. So that is still in effect. There's a 120-day moratorium.
Mr. Mead, excuse the interruption. I apologize, but I worry I will lose this thread. Refresh my memory, at least, if you could. The 180-day forbearance on a homeowner's mortgage, does that mean then that at the end of 180 days, mortgage payments commence per usual on a monthly basis? Or does that mean at the end of 180 days, okay, now it's time for you to come up with the 6 months of mortgage payments you haven't been able to make thus far?
The way the law was written was silent on how that payments are. It could just continue on the same monthly basis at the same rate, or whether the servicer of the loan could require the 180 days of unpaid mortgage payments upfront as one lump payment, if you will. They left that to the discretion of the mortgage servicers. And there's some talk of trying to clean that up or clarify that in a future relief package. And so that's sort of, I would say, on the table for negotiations still.
Thank you. I know that's an issue that our board has been anxious about in another context, and I'm sorry if I took you off track, but I think that is, in terms of the practical utility of that, quote, protection, I think that's a rather obvious and significant concern. All right, I'll let you get back to it. Thank you. Oh, wait a minute. Is Mr. Cortese raising his hand or just turning the light on? Forgive me, I couldn't tell.
Both. I just wanted to second what you're saying. That's all. So it's clear that the committee considers that a pretty serious omission. If you don't mind me characterizing it that way, I think that's in part what you're saying. Hard to imagine legislation going forward at that level, at that magnitude, without clearing that issue up, in an integrated fashion and not waiting to try to clean it up later. So not sure what we can do about it, but again, I just want to join in flagging that issue. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you. Back to you, Mr. Mead.
Always happy to take questions. I think I was going to turn to the provision for the renter's assistance, where there's a 120-day moratorium on evictions for lack of rent payments. And that provision expired, I should say, on July 25th. The HEROES Act continued both those policies forward. The HEROES Act allowed the rental assistance to carry forward to a year after the date of enactment of that law. And they also included another 360 days of the forbearance on the mortgages. The HEROES Act also provided relief for auto loans too for 6 months. And it also provided some liability protection for loan servicers for the investors in those loans. So you can't be held liable for non-payment on the loans in, say, for example, a securitized loan package. As I mentioned, HEROES Act continues those policies. The HEALS Act, while the HEALS Act provided 3.3 Department of Housing and Urban Development for housing programs, it didn't have any provisions that directly protected renters or homeowners in it. And so since the HEROES Act does have those provisions and the HEALS Act does not, it's sort of on the table for negotiation between the two chambers. And if I had to make a guess or a bet, I think it's fairly likely that the final version of this package will have some further protections for both renters and homeowners. How long the protections last is still to be negotiated, but I think the final package will contain some protections.
Got it. Anything else, Mr. Mead, at this point?
No, I think I'll keep my report brief on just those items and turn it back to you, Supervisor.
Thank you. I do have a couple of questions, and then I'll go to Supervisor Cortese. And I want to revisit the comments that Ms. Christian offered about provisions in current legislation, as I understood it, and in proposed legislation or in proposed legislation, dealing with our ability as a county to access federal funds and essentially use them to replace lost revenue during this economic downturn associated with COVID. Ms. Christian, did I capture the gist of that? Can you clarify a little bit more for us, please?
Yes, so the HEROES Act adds lost revenue as an eligible funding activity for the existing funds that were provided to state and local governments under the CARES Act and any new federal fiscal aid. The HEALS Act allows for a limited amount of lost revenue incurred to be claimed against those CRF funds, and then puts in some restrictions, specifically saying that before you use some of that money for lost revenue, you need to certify that a quarter of those funds have been provided to, the phrase that I found is downstream local governments, meaning cities inside your jurisdiction. So it removes our flexibility, reduces the amount of funds to the county. I mean, the question of, were the funds sufficient for all of our coronavirus activities and our lost revenue remains. And my guess is that no, it's not completely backfilling for both those areas. But it would further reduce some of the money provided. But again, those are the provisions that are in the Senate HEALS Act, the House HEROES Act, and I should also say the Senate HEALS Act hasn't even come up for a vote in the Senate. It's their marker. But the House HEROES Act, which the House has approved, provides a lot more flexibility for the county.
And we had on prior legislation had a concern about the way funds were distributed and or shared in a relatively small number of jurisdictions, but Santa Clara County being one of them, with a large city. I believe the cutoff was over 500,000 population. And the fact that while we clearly all want cities to get what they need to get the job done, that might adversely affect Santa Clara County, given the presence of a large city like San Jose in our boundaries. What's the status of that conversation in terms of the HEROES Act and the HEALS Act? Because I heard you reference funds for state and local governments.
Supervisor Simonian, to answer that, I'd need to do a little bit more research so that I don't say something inaccurate. But
okay.
But you characterized it fairly in that, we did receive less funds because the city of San Jose is receiving funds. And, we're one of, I can't recall, 10, 12 jurisdictions across the United States in that situation from the previous federal aid packages that have been passed and enacted.
All right. If you could give us an off-agenda report, and I do think it's worth sharing with the entire board, yeah, just so we understand the consequences, because this was a significant impact, as I recall, in earlier rounds of funding. Let me just go back to Mr. Mead or anyone else on the call who knows. My recollection is that sometime within the last day or two, there was a bit of news that went by me on the president speaking to the issue of eviction moratoriums, somehow through CDC, if I'm remembering correctly. Can somebody help me with that fragment of a memory and maybe put a little meat on the bones?
So the president did issue an executive order on evictions. However, the thinking is that the executive order doesn't functionally work as it was intended. So it may not actually provide the relief it's being characterized as giving.
Mr. Mead, can I ask you to also give our offices some additional information on that as well? We've had just within the last 48 hours action on eviction protections from our state legislature, which are somewhat complicated by virtue of preemption components or provisions, excuse me. And so I think, I see Ms. Narayan still on the call with us. I think it's going to be important and frankly helpful if we can find a way to understand what's happening at the federal level, what's happening at the state level. We know what action we've taken here at the county level. We have some cities in our county who have taken action as well on this issue. And I think understanding what that all means once they are blended, harmonized, and preemption issues are resolved is going to be important to real people with either residential rents or small business rents that are trying to figure out what their position is. So, Mr. Mead, go ahead. Thank you.
Yes, we'll be happy to coordinate with staff to try and put together a comprehensive look at the federal and state actions.
Thank you. And Ms. Narayan, is the county counsel's office the right place for that parsing and determination to be referred?
I'm happy to follow up with Ms. Christian to make sure that's answered.
All right. And I know my staff is on the line. I'm going to ask them to follow up with all parties because I do think all of us are going to want to be able to communicate more clearly than I think I could right now about like, all right, you know, when the end of the month comes around, what's your status? What's your situation? What protection do you have? And I think that's going to be important information for us to share.
Understood, and thank you.
All right. Thank you. Supervisor Cortese, thank you for your patience, sir. Comments or questions on this report?
I appreciate what the reports that you've requested off agenda. I think that'll be helpful. I'm glad you requested for the entire board. I don't have anything else to add. Thank you.
All right. Anything else from members of the team, Ms. Christian or Ms. Dorton or others? Or
This is Danielle. Thank you. I don't have anything else to add.
Ms. Dorton, are we good for the day?
We are.
All right. Well, then what I'll do without objection is we'll consider item number 9 completed, the report received. We have taken action on our minutes through the consent calendar. So I will thank you all for being here this morning and thank again Congressman Rokana's office for sending his team to participate as well.
Chairperson, I do
Without
see
objection.
I do see a request from Mr. Pike to speak.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Pike. I've twice referenced you, but not once called upon you. So go right ahead, sir.
Yeah, no problem. Just real quick, I did want to underscore that this is a great opportunity to hear what the county's priorities are and concerns relative to federal legislation and funding. Certainly a primary focus for us is getting money to state and local governments in COVID release packages. That is probably the top priority, as well as protecting the Postal Service and the census and so on. So great to hear all this. Again, if relative to fire relief funds, let us know if the state is slow to respond to your further requests. I'm sure that all the congressional offices that whose districts were impacted, which would be Kana and Lofgren on the east side relative to SCU fire, would be happy to jump in and help if that's appropriate. So again, thank you for the information. It reinforces what we're doing and gives us a good perspective, and it's a very good opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you once more. And without objection, we are adjourned to our next regular meeting, which is October the 7th at 10 a.m.
Thank you, Mr.
Appreciate
Chairman.
it. Take care.
Thank you.